So tonight we have Eddie Dominguez, and I usually say, well, I'm not going to really introduce the person too much because you've all read about them on the little constant contact things we send out that talk about the person. But in this case, Eddie didn't give us a huge, 50 paragraph biography about himself or anything. So I'm just going to mention that those of you well, I think you all know him, but anyway. Got his BFA from the Cleveland Institute of Art in 1981. In 1983, he got an MFA from New York State College of Ceramics at Alfred University. And he began teaching ceramics and sculpture at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln in 2000. I believe that he's going to tell us about how he's retired just now. And but he's had too many solo shows and group exhibitions. And if you want to see more of his work, you can go to Alfred to see it. You can go, I'm talking about the work that is in our show that has the Rose Garden and that kind of thing, but also at the Renwick Gallery in Washington, D.C. and many other places. So without further ado, we're going to get Eddie Dominguez live here with us on Zoom, and I'll let you take it away, Eddie.
Hello, and thank you all for attending. I appreciate that. This first slide that I'm showing you is a slide that, or is an image that I share with my students, and I find it very inspiring. It's cultivated an obsession, and while most good students of natural history are observant to life around them generally, it is also beneficial to always be working with a specific question in mind, a particular group, species, or issue which you can lavish thought, study, and attention. A good question fills us with a sense of purpose and gives structure to our observations. It engages our minds on levels unforeseen and leads to more knowledge than helpless wandering about can. And rather than narrowing the creative response, it seems somehow to mysteriously expand it. Questions lead to further questions, and inquiry breeds insight. Gathering expertise brings both confidence and constellation. I guess, the reason I like to think of a good question is because we all have to begin somewhere, and beginning with a good question leads us to answers. When I was thinking about going to art school, knowing that I always wanted to, I'd imagined myself being a painter. It wasn't until 1980 that I decided that I would like to be a craftsman. And I switched over from the painting department to ceramics, and it was probably one of the best choices. But I think that the question at that time was, why? Why would I want to switch over? And I've spent the last 40 plus years trying to imagine why. But these bowls were a project that my teacher asked me to do. And I remember making these bowls and feeling so inspired by the material and the beauty of it. And the whole idea of function and utility was very interesting to me. As a painter, it does have function, but it doesn't have utility. And there was something about making vessels that one could use physically to serve a meal, to drink a beverage, that was very intriguing to me at that time. So that's the only piece that you're going to see from my undergraduate study. But I did go to Alfred assuming that I would be a potter and work with making vessels of utility. But as a student, you begin to wonder, and I was asking questions like, what is it that I'm supposed to be making? What is the reality of my work, and why am I making this kind of work? And what does it mean? And where does it come from? Is it historically referenced? Is it personally referenced? Is it from my experiences? Where? And so the search began, and I made this piece that was called Me and My Alfred Friends. And what I discovered in making this piece is that I enjoyed working physically, arranging objects to create some sort of structure that maybe in some way told a story. And I began trying to think about what is it that I wanted to make, and the idea of dinnerware sets. Around that time, there was a big question about art versus crafts and the differences between them. And as a potter, I was really feeling that question. And I started also realizing that I came from a culture, a place very specific, and that I really wanted to indulge some of the resources that I had grown up looking at being a part of. So this piece really was about discovering the things that really mattered to me. This is called Going to Market to Sell My Goods. And I began to explore multimedia and using materials in a way to express different things like the macrames, the wooden thing, making the rug, using the donkey, putting parts together that in the end became a whole. Uh, Also, the question of pottery and its function and its use. But at the very same time that year, I had lost my niece, and it was very traumatic for me because it was the first time I'd ever experienced loss. And I wanted to make a memorial for her. And so I made this memorial, and it gave me a system. It gave me a possible view of what I might actually indulge in, what I might ask an important question about. I started asking myself why. I started asking myself what. And a piece like this really started to begin to answer a lot of the questions that I had. I grow a garden, and I've always looked at nature for my inspiration. I think that nature had most of the answers that I was in search of. I enjoyed reading, I enjoyed looking at art history, I enjoyed studying ceramics, all this stuff. But where I felt that the truer answers for the questions that I was asking were really embedded in the land, were embedded in the landscape, were embedded in the garden, and the idea of food, food preparation, sharing that. Um, but I look at something like this and I saw a plate, I saw a bowl. But for my graduate thesis project, I decided to do an installation. And in the installation, I was very interested with the domestic objects in home. So a dining table with dinnerware sets, with stools, with rug, with tablecloth. Started to bring together the things that mattered to me. And rather than being embarrassed about my sources, I started feeling pride in my sources and really began to use those more specifically than referencing other artists or referencing history in any way, but really referencing the things that I grew up with, the kinds of things that I saw my family doing, the kinds of things that my mother was involved with. And so those influences and those sources seem more real to me and honest, that whenever I spoke about my work using any historical referencing, it didn't feel that way. It felt like I was making things up or that it was studied rather than felt. And felt is what I wanted to express in my work. What do I feel when I make? How do I feel when I make? So this is I was very interested in working with the home, what the home has to offer and what the environments in the home and what the home contains. So the dining room was the first iteration of those ideas. Here's a detail of the table setting. So you're looking at two plates, a glass, a set of stacked bowls. The centerpiece is a pitcher with serving accessories. So assembled, they became sculpture. And the question that I was asking then was not only why was ceramics talked about being marginalized? What did that really mean? You know, what was the issue between arts and crafts? It was the 70s, and that was a question in the 70s. I think currently that question is really not really being spoken about in the same way. I think that, and for me, the idea of making sculpture and painting was how I sort of had established my earlier ideas about being an artist. So when I started making vessels and pottery, it seemed like there was a question as if, am I still an artist? Am I still that kind of creative person? So, you know, I had to kind of wander myself through these issues and begin to resolve them for myself because I thought it was important. Uh, but the thing that the work always contained was utility, my interest in the things that got used. So this is an example of a stool. And sentimentality started to come into my work as much as anything else. And this is a portrait of the home I grew up in. And I remember my teacher, Judith Solomon, coming to my studio in Alfred and saying that I was very sentimental. And I remember feeling like at one point that was something I should have been embarrassed about because sentiment in art isn't really something that was looked at in a favorable way. But I realized that that was true. And following that truth led me to a lot of other works that I was feeling slightly insecure about, but started feeling better about as I progressed in the resolution of these questions that I was trying to find answers to. So I made the dining room and then I wanted to make the bedroom. So you're looking at a dresser and a lamp. And the idea of multimedia, mixed media is very much how I work. But when I work in clay, it is kind of different. But I've always used a range of material. This is made out of metal, wood, mirror, stained glass, photographs. So I was able to access other interests and curiosities that I had in terms of material knowledge. Whoa, I don't know how to go backwards. So you're looking at the bed, and the bed for me offered an opportunity to talk about intimate issues, right? It was a private space, a bedroom. I was using materials at this point to begin to describe things. So metal seemed like masculine, and colorful things seemed feminine, and the idea of gender started coming into the work at this point because I also felt like things were divided into what was a masculine activity and what might be considered a feminine activity. And I was wondering why I was interested in both and how could I resolve that issue? You know, was I any less of a man because I wanted to do domestic things, which in my culture was very oriented towards the female, and things that the man did were very different. And so when I started to combine these, of course, the question was, where am I in the middle of this mix? A few of my favorite things is just a collection of objects. I think many ceramic people and other people, creative people, like to surround things that inspire them. So you're looking at something here that is, I find at that time, and probably still do, very inspiring. What kinds of things do we collect that feed us, feed our creativity, feed our interests, that describe us? Maybe even our personality beyond our interests, but something that would let us in or other people viewing into my world. How does my world look when it's being viewed? Of course, we all need a bathroom, and I did this bathroom in Kohler, Wisconsin, and a residency at in Sheboygan at the Kohler factory. And it is, you're not seeing, you're seeing the objects, but it has been a completed installation, but I never photographed it because, well, there's a lot of things I love to do, but seemingly documenting my work isn't one of them. It's packed, and I've kept this work. This work I made for myself with the intention of understanding, never with the intention of marketing it, never with the intention of even having to display it. But I really felt secure in knowing that what I wanted to make, I needed to make, and I had my reasons for making it. And it was okay with me that it wasn't going to be out in the world. It was okay with me that it wasn't going to be viewed. What wasn't okay with me was that if I wasn't going to stop myself from making it, I needed to make these things because I was asking questions that were important to me. And the only way that I could resolve it and find answer was through manufacturing, through working with my hands, with thinking with my mind. So these works were challenging, time consuming, but probably fed more the issues that I was surrounding myself with than anything I've ever done. So I find this work to be very important to me personally. Here's a passing moments. Yeah, I was giving things titles. A piece previously was called Gone Fishing. So, you know, I was starting to add story. I was starting sentiment. I was looking at landscape. I was finding the things that were most interesting to me and using those to create. Anything but the kitchen sink is a demonstration of my interest in multimedia, quilts, patterns, geometry. I found that places for the things that I was asking. And I remember my teacher Wayne Igby, I said once to him, I love the grid. And he goes, so what? Everybody loves the grid. And that can throw you off or it can motivate you. For me, it motivated me because I had to help him understand why these things were important. And I needed to give them resource and voice. And this is when histories and things that you've read and other artists that maybe have influence, you can come into the conversation. But I did this as a commission piece and for a gentleman for his kitchen. And so I called it Everything But the Kitchen Sink. And right below it, you can see that it's right above that. But it was a challenge for me to work with this because I viewed him as a very important art collector, and his home was filled with what one might feel is important collecting. And I felt like he was missing a lot of stuff. So this is what I wanted to contribute into his collection was the idea of the things that I grew up with, plastic fruit, cutlery, wooden paraphernalia, just stuff, cutlery, spoons and stuff. So I gave that to him, and I was really excited by this particular piece back then. Still am. It's in the collection of the Everson Museum. Currently, he gifted it to them. Also made this piece called Collective Knowledge. Again, I want to remind you that my interest has always been in utility. So I make domestic objects, doors, dressers, beds, quilts, and soon I'll show you some dinnerware sets. This is called Going Shop Every Things from Tucumcari, which is where I grew up in New Mexico, a small town there on the eastern side of the state. And I just went to the thrift shop daily and collected an object. This piece took over a couple of years or more to make. I wasn't in any rush, I was making it, I was shopping, I was enjoying the process, and I was trying to describe the place where I grew up at. At that time, my studio was there, and I'm very grateful that I went back to work in that small town and be surrounded with my family. As a painter, I was very interested in landscape, and these landscapes depict where I grew up, where I lived, the kinds of things that I saw. I used the back at this point because I had struggled with a back injury, and so it seemed a fair study. But I can remember in my early years looking at a back on the wall and thinking, well, that's a really dumb thing. You cast your back, you put it up on the wall. What's that? Well, I found out what that was. And when you begin to speak more intimately about your work and your health and your issues and your dramas, it starts to give purpose and reason to your marks, to your choices of color, to what you might actually apply those images on. This is a piece that I made in bronze, and it's large. It's about 5 foot by 4 foot by. It was just one of the greatest challenges in my professional making. I started from ground zero. I knew nothing about the materials. I knew nothing about the process, but I understood the ambition and that it was going to take quite a bit of ambition in order for me to complete this project because I was starting from absolute zero. I was ignorant to the materials. I was ignorant to the processes. So it took a lot of learning in order to bring this to some kind of reality. And I think it's very good for artists to challenge themselves and to work in areas that are unfamiliar and with materials that you have no material knowledge about, and begin to understand how you might be able to use them through interpreting through your own language what they might mean and what they could mean. Examples of a large plate in a closed form. Again, my interest in painting, my interest in landscape. And I never stopped being a painter. I just started translating the way I saw paint into glaze, into ceramics. I do still use oil paint. I still do draw and find those creative experiences important. But it is clay that was my primary interest in study. It was clay that has been my primary interest over the years, but it's always been influenced by other materials, and it's always been in me, and it will always be in me. Dresser. In this piece, I was really trying to describe issues. This is beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and it was really starting to helped me understand the ideas of gender identity and what it meant, what it might mean to be female, what it might mean to be male, what describes those personalities, what describes that human being. And now with the whole fluid culture, I think that there's still so much more work that I could indulge in, and I might. But this was in earlier works, around the late 80s, 90s, somewhere around there. I don't know. I never keep track of time. Time has always been very fluid to me. And so, when I made it, feels like the other day, could have been years ago. I think that once you fabricate something, it lives in you and as a thought and as a memory. And so I value that. This is a self-portrait of me giving birth to myself. And so it's called The Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. So religion started coming in, and my questions about religion, my questions about sexuality, my questions about masculinity, my questions about even, is this art? I'm making a dresser. How is that art? Why is that art? How are people going to see or recognize this as being an expression of mine? But I cared less about that and was more interested in just indulging myself in my interests and what I was seeing and how I was seeing and how I was thinking. I'm grateful that a lot of this work has gone out into the world and is maybe enjoyed by others. But primarily when we're working in our studio, we're working because we're there, we're with it, and then we gift it. And if we're lucky, someone receives that gift. But it's never been my impetus. My reasons for making work have always been of more of a personal nature and in search of questions and answers that I was thinking about. But as I said, I love making pottery. I always have. And when I went into my ceramic program in 1980 or 1979 or whatever year it was, immediately I felt a very clear connection to that material. Maybe because it was dirt, maybe because it was land, maybe because even the question of it, is it art or isn't it art? There was a lot of maybes in those world in that time, maybes that I knew that there was answers that I could believe, and there were opinions that I didn't believe. And that was important to me because I was being instructed and I needed to learn and I wanted to learn. And sometimes I didn't agree and I would feel badly about that because I felt that they knew more. But what I knew is that I knew me or that I was trying to discover me. I love gardens. I've always grown gardens. The irises have been important to me since my childhood. They grew in the alleys of the neighborhood. They were so abundant, and I always felt like they were like, the weed of the alley. And I just used to think that they were so beautiful. But again, what I saw were when I started to look differently at them, besides just the wow of how beautiful nature is. I began to see vessels. I began to see plates. And I know that in my studies through ceramic history, that many people have over histories looked at nature for information. And I think maybe it's because clay is just rooted in dirt and things grow from dirt. And so it would seem like a natural assimilation to have that as an influence and as a reality for, I think, many, many crafts and ceramic people. But this is a dinnerware at the Dinnerware Museum, and you can see how the iris might have influenced this work. It looks similar in the view, and even in its color. But my question then was, how can I make pottery into sculpture? How can I incorporate ideas of painting, very important to me, into my structures? What can I do to arrange them? Immediately thought about stacking dinnerware stacks. You open up your dish cabinet and it's stacked with dishes. So it seemed like a very natural solution at the time. And I started the dinnerware sets in graduate school with the question like, why isn't pottery important? Why do you talk about pottery as if it's just a thing that people use? uh, I felt those questions in the air. And I was curious to find an answer, at least an answer that I could live with. So when I started stacking the dinnerware sets, using the tumbler as a stem, using the bowls as a flower, using the leaves as a plate, my questions were starting to be answered. They were revealing themselves to me little at a time, but I felt their truth. And over the years, I explored various themes of the dinnerware. I was curious about how else I could present dinnerware into these views that described image. So you're looking at what looks like an image of a fish aquarium, in its case, in its uh, uh, cabinet. I grew up in an upholstery shop and was a wood refinisher for many, many years. It's been something I've enjoyed all through my life. And so I also wanted to incorporate some of the trades that I knew. So I started bringing in the furniture. I started bringing in the woodwork. I started bringing in the various materials that I wanted to work with and including clay with them. So that's really how I resolved them. I made this piece for after the birth of my son. It's called Anton's Flowers. It became a theme for me over the years to make several dinnerware sets that were celebrating the idea of life and death. And I think of nature that way too. Anybody who grows a garden understands that. In the spring they sprout, in the fall they die back. And there's something really beautiful about that. That earlier piece that I made for my niece when she passed away was demonstrating that it happens in life, it happens in nature. It is a part of our world that we all have to learn to accept. Never probably like that much, but always know that we begin and we end. And so how am I going to live my life so that when I end it, when it ends for me, I will feel grateful for the way I was able to live, making the things that I love to make. So a top view of what you might see. So they unstack, and you're looking at bowls, plates, cups, saucers, bud vases, salt and pepper shakers. Another rendition of Anton's Garden. And the place settings varied from 8 to 12. I grew up in a family that was 12 people, so it seemed like a natural number, to use to make and that would feed a family. I don't think people have really ever used them very often, maybe occasionally. So I know that the utility is sacrificed, but I really did still try to keep the idea of the vessel, the idea of the cup, the idea of the bowl, and tried to keep utility as part of it. But they're complicated, they're assemblages, and so many other things run into interference in their practical use. But it was in their use that the whole it was primary to the work, I think. Fall, just ideas of how things change. The bottom might represent crazy quilts, something I grew up with, and half the time think I feel that way. Hmm. But it gives you a sense of scale, so I included myself in this image so that you can get a sense of the scale of this work. And examples. Night garden, the idea of what would it look like in a more minimal presentation? What would it look like in a more exuberant presentation? How can I change the view by changing the time of day? I had a dealer in Santa Fe, my art dealer there for 20 years, who was the most generous gentleman I'd ever worked with. And when he passed away, I made this dinnerware set for him, and it's called Fall Garden. Again, using the idea of nature, the falling of nature and things dying. I thought it was an appropriate way to thank him for the years that we worked together. And then my parents passed away. and I made these. And it was really the first time that I had indulged pottery, real pottery. They are plates, cups, bowls, teapots, pitchers, things that could really be used. My parents were very practical people, so I didn't want to make something that wasn't going to be practical, something that couldn't be used. I wanted these to be used. I made them to be used. Of course, they've never been used, but that's beside the point. The intention was important, and so the black piece is called Time of Reflection, which was made for my father, and the white piece is titled Desert Rose, which was made after my mother. They're cabinets. It's about 7 feet tall by 4 feet wide, about 18 inches, 16 inches deep, with as big a place setting that I could make. I wanted to try everything, you know. I wanted to make teapot, pitchers, bowls, plates, saucers, dessert dishes. It was maybe some of the most challenging work I ever made, and really gave me great appreciation for how difficult it is to make a good vessel of utility. I always camouflaged mine by painting them, carving them, creating an illusion or an image. In this work, I really struggled to make what I thought were good formed tableware. Uh, I made my mother a set of stones, a tombstone of sorts, I suppose, you know, describing the life that I had with her, describing the life that she had with her children. You know, I think that death has always been an important part of my work, given that when I lost my niece and knew that we're here for a reason, that we're here to do what we were born to do. And I know I was born to be an artist, and I'm glad that I was able and grateful that I was able to live my life creatively. It's what I was born for. And that's a hard thing to find, but I knew that very early on. I knew that this is who I was and these were the things that I am. And I wanted to explore my life creatively and live in a creative way. I've been grateful to be able to teach, you know, because it allowed me to share and for my students to share. And it's a knowledge place, it's a knowledge base. So I was learning from them, they were learning from me, we were learning from each other. It's such a beautiful environment to be creative in, where everybody's asking questions. This is a wind chime. It's called Tears from Heaven, also a memorial. Made a few memorials in my time. A more current exhibition. This is one that was at the Everson Museum a couple of years ago, but it gives you a presentation of how my work looks, all mounted, you know, all the various things that I'm interested in. This is called La Sangre de la Tierra, which is the earth is bleeding. And I was thinking about, you know, ecology. And as I mentioned, I always ask my work to try to teach me something. And here I was realizing that I had a love for the land and what was I doing to make the land better? And what was I doing that was actually contaminating the land? So I carved text into this piece that was both good and bad. The things that we do, the things that I do, the things that I was going to try to stop myself from doing. So I think that when you live with art and you live through your art, the things that you're learning, the things that you're discovering, and the questions that you might be asking yourself are important. And at this time, I really just wanted to know more about geography and land and our stewardship of it. This is a 25-foot rosary called Blood of the Earth. So here I was questioning ideas of religion and my place in it. But I would say that maybe some of the most important work that I've done is working with community and doing public art projects. This is really one of the very first art projects that I did back in 91 in Tucson, Arizona on the Martin Luther King apartment complex. And I worked with over 1,000 people. And what I learned was that community-based work was very satisfying. It felt my intentions with it were genuine. And when I worked with people, I felt whole. You know, sometimes making art, it can be a very insular activity. It's you and it. But when you work with community, it's you and them. And it was a really wonderful way to use my creative nature and share with people their nature and their abilities, and give them permission to be creative with me. The piece on top was made at a nursing home with people who are struggling with age, different issues that old people have. I'm finding that now, but then it was just the opportunity to work with a group of individuals that were being taken care of, and how could I add to beauty to their environment. The piece below I did with a group of eighth graders, and it was called Islands of the Imagination, where each student wrote a poem, and then we collaged them through mosaics up on the wall of their hall. So again, it was a way to bring artwork into their lives that they created. Did this in Albuquerque, New Mexico, also with eighth graders, and this is called Pillars of the Community. And this is a more recent public art project that I did that was a memoriam to the COVID experience of the first responders at a local hospital here in town. And I felt a calling for this piece because, we all struggled through that whole time. And it was a very difficult time. And there were people who were the first responders who were taking care of a lot of people. I was very happy to celebrate and give them thanks through this public art project. And here's an example of just how lucky I was to work with people who were long in their life and people who were just beginning theirs. Thank you all. I appreciate you. That's done.
Thank you, Eddie.
You're welcome.
That was really fascinating. I'm sure other people have questions, and you can either, once you get unmuted and we can see your faces, or you can put the question in the chat and you don't have to say anything to anybody. I am curious about the scale of the work that you do. Like a lot of it seems monumental or life size. Like I assume I haven't seen the dressers in person, but I just in my mind, and maybe this isn't even really a question, but lots of times when the Dinnerware Museum is talking about something in the collection, whether it's an artist-made piece or it's a manufactured piece, we don't really have to say what size it is because everybody kind of knows what size dinnerware is. And so, like the rose garden that we have in the museum, and the other ones I've seen in person, they're kind of monumental installations where you have incorporated things like ours has leather and copper and other materials on it that I should say are in beautiful condition. You know what you're doing because everything's intact and looks wonderful. So I'm just thinking about scale of work. Did you ever make work that was like tiny and intimate?
No, no, because utility was important. So if I'm going to make a bed, well, I think maybe it would be nice to be able to sleep in it. And so
Okay.
dressers that are dressers and chair size if you're going to sit down, so those were givens actually for me, and doing an environment or doing a room gives you a sense of what the room might be scaled at, so yeah, everything I hope or try to make the size that they are. So a bowl is, like you say, the size of a bowl. We all understand how big it is. And a plate is a plate, and we know the size of that. So yeah, over a door is a regular door. But
And
yeah, some things like the rosaries, well, those are 25 foot long and they are monumental.
oh, that's kind of what I was thinking of, that rather than some people work in little tiny, like a precious thing or an erotic thing or something, something you can put in your pocket or something. But
No, I
yours
tried.
are all.
I'm not going to say I haven't tried to make small, intimate objects, but I was never successful in those efforts. I guess I just like to make things a little bit bigger. The
So,
cup, though, the cup is one of the givens that is of an intimate size, and so I love making those bird cups. I haven't made that many, but there's stories behind everything that I make. Really, I feed myself stories. I'm a bit of a storyteller, I guess, and it gives me a way to pick. It gives me a scale. It gives me a color range. Um, yeah. So. The dinnerware sets are at the scale that they need to be because, well, I have 12 plates. So that's how big they are. If I make one that's 6 plates, well, that's how big that is. So, it's not a given. It's just natural to their size.
okay, and could you tell me what happened to those fabulous installations you did that were the bedroom and the bathroom one you've implied is packed away somewhere, but the dressers and the one that was metal and had mirrors and what happened to those? Because those are fabulous.
Thank you. I have them.
Oh,
I kept them.
if we go in the next room, will we see it?
No, no, they're packed away, they're stored, they're being taken care of by me. I made that work for me and it's mine. Not
Huh.
everything I make I keep, but I do keep things that are important to me.
And do you keep this is a curatorial question. Do you keep a careful record or log book of who
Yeah. You're talking
I
to
hear
an
the
artist,
answer
honey.
coming on
I
this
wish I was that way, but I'm not good at everything, and that certainly isn't one of them. But I did manage to store them, and I've managed to be a good steward to them. Um, no, I'm
one. So
not
you don't
that
keep track of who
organized.
owns what.
In
So,
my head, I feel organized, but the rest of the world might see me as a very disorganized person.
so we have a raised hand.
I can just start talking. Yeah.
Yes, you can.
Hello,
Hi,
Matt.
hi, Eddie.
Hello, Shoko.
Thank you for the talk. Here's the little bird you
Oh my
gave
Oh,
goodness.
when
wow.
I
Wow.
graduated. Yep. Um, Eddie, I have a teaching question. So this question is just the one that's kind of around this week. Come up with a few students that I'm working with. It has to do with execution. And I'm finding right now more students are like they plan something, and so much of their time in the studio, they focus on execution, fabricating. And so I'm thinking about this with you, and my memory is that you really encouraged fluidity, and you talked about being present in the studio. I would like to know, what did you have to say to students that spent their time in execution rather in those malleable moments of discovery? Yeah.
Well, that's a hard question, Matt. That's
Yeah.
true because, as craftspeople, I think we always want to just get better, and we think that execution is a way to get there. But if you don't come up with an idea that you feel like spending that kind of precious time with, then maybe you're just practicing. I think it's important to have an idea, and it's okay to be malleable. I mean, what is good craftsmanship? What is bad craftsmanship, right? How do we view that? I always say that I would rather have my student have a rich idea than a resolved object. I think that through life we practice, we get better at answering our own questions, but it's a hard question you're asking, really, because you want your students to indulge in the material and learn from it. They want to make something that they feel pride in execution. That can get in their way, man. All of a sudden they're working just trying to make it look good, but they don't have any substance. And I have students who have a lot of substance, but don't know how to make things very well. And sometimes I think for me, I value that. I encourage that in them, you know. I'm not going to judge them on their fabrication always. I'm going to judge them on their feeling and their intuition, their reasons that they want to put out. Seems to me important. I remember when Shoko was my student and she was making small objects and she was so good at making them. And she was thinking maybe I need to make them bigger. And I thought, well, I don't know. You make them so good small. Why do they need to be big? And she still makes beautiful small objects. Some of the most beautiful small objects, I think. You were my student too. Oh my
Thanks,
goodness.
Eddie. Thank you.
You were my first student.
And we had another raised hand. I think it was Fran.
Yeah, I'm just blown away. I just can't believe the depth of the kind of questions that you're asking yourself all the time and how you find the answers by making. You're a maker. I mean, I was trying to list all the different things that you find the answers for the big questions that we have in the world. And then when you started to make the memorials for the people that you cared about, you brought tears to my eyes because they were wonderful and they are touching and they're so you, and yet they emit so much emotion. And I just enjoyed this whole evening so much. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we've had a few comments in the chat. There have been no questions, but there are some comments. I'll read some of those. New Mexicans are so proud of Eddie Dominguez. And another comment was, yes, we are. Another comment is, thank you, Eddie, for sharing your questions about life, death, and religion, your place in it. Your work is a powerful interpretation of those profound questions we are fortunate to ask.
Nice. Thank you.
Does anybody else have some questions? Or maybe you're just all spellbound. I wish I'd been your student, Eddie. I've learned from you just the other night and today. Very happy about it. So there's a few other comments, are there?
We have another raised hand.
Hi, Eddie.
Sir, how are you, Will?
Thank you.
One of my greatest inspirations is you, sir.
It was so nice to actually kind of catch up with a lot of the things that you've been doing that I've not seen, but I having gone through the experience, I wanted to ask you about it. Now that you're no longer teaching, I'm wondering how has that changed what you're doing in your studio?
Well, Bill, I am giving myself a break. I'm trying to reevaluate my interests and thinking about how I'm going to volunteer. It's new to me. It's only been a few months, and so I'm just trying to gather right now. I do know that I want to make furniture. I gave up my clay practice, at least for now, gave away my equipment to a handicap facility for adults, and I want to go work there with them. So I let go of a very important material, and I described it a little bit like taking the elephant out of the room. If I was going to make room, I needed to take the biggest thing out, and so that I could make room for other things. So at the moment, I'm just thinking, what are they? I do have one more installation I want to complete, which is the living room. And I think that that's really going to be the next thing I make. Because it's something that I need to finish up. You know, it was life's ambition to do the installations, and now towards the end, I think I'm going to have time to be able to work with that, and I'm excited about it. I'm starting to draw, and I'm starting to think, you know, how I can make these things, and what is it that I want to make. I think the idea of the living room sounds like a wonderful start. You know, where we live, a room where we live, a room where we share. It's an invitation. So that's where I'm at. I think I want to flip some furniture. And I don't know if it's going to be art or not exactly. By the definition that we use to describe art, it's just going to be indulging my interests.
Well, one of the things that uh, I did, I think it was like after I quit teaching at CIA, is I took a chair making workshop with this guy here in Ohio, and it was very, very simple stuff. We didn't use any really complicated tools, and chairs are, I think, very, very difficult to make. But I thought, well, if I can learn how to make something without all the hardware that you associate with furniture, that might let me do some other things too.
I keep looking for chairs on the side of the road, Bill. I love chairs. I've always loved chairs. Maybe it's Van Gogh's fault because he made that portrait of a chair in the studio. And now the chair I'm sitting in right now is a portrait of me. So yeah, I think there's a lot of potential in furniture making. And I like the idea that they would be useful. And maybe this time they really will be useful.
Well,
You know, I've always camouflaged it with my point of view and my referencing to art and this and that, but maybe I can make a chair that is actually a chair that you can sit in.
Do we have more questions for Eddie? These are great. I could stay here all night, but probably some people will want to go have dinner or something. But I have one more question, Eddie, from me. So now that you've mentioned this living room, I envision a whole house. Maybe you'll build the house, or maybe you've built your house, I'm not sure, but that all of these different rooms would be filled with your creations. Is that a goal?
It's been the fantasy, it's been the goal. My family has lived in the home I grew up in for over 100 years, and I have always imagined that I would fill that house up eventually. But, you know, will that become a reality? It certainly is a goal. I don't know what I'm going to do with those installations other than keep them.
Well, we'll want to see them all in place.
You'd have to go to that
We'll have a
hometown of
return,
mine.
a return invitation for you.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
You
well,
go
I want to thank
ahead,
you all for
Margaret, and
attending this
help me
evening.
find a venue to showcase those works.
Huh. Well, I invite you to Kingston, New York, and we'll do it. Anyway, thank you very much, Eddie. Thank you all for attending this evening, and we'll see you in a month. Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for
I
attending.
know.